The sea, it remembers everything. Every whisper of the wind, every scream that vanished beneath the waves. It is both a graveyard and a witness holding secrets that mankind will never fully recover. During the Second World War, men feared many things: the sky, the bombs, the guns. But to those who sailed the endless Atlantic, there was no fear greater than the silence that followed a distress call. Because once a ship vanished into that silence, the ocean never gave it back. Between 1939 and 1945, the world's oceans became battlegrounds. Thousands of merchant ships, lifelines of war, crossed black waters, carrying food, weapons, and hope itself. They traveled in tight formation convoys, as they were called, guarded by destroyers and corvettes. But even in groups, they were never safe. Beneath them, unseen and patient, the hunters waited: German U-boats, wolves of the sea. Every night, the Atlantic turned into a deadly chessboard. Convoys moved cautiously through fog and darkness, praying that their signal lamps would not betray them. And yet, one by one, ships began to vanish. Some were struck by torpedoes and exploded into fireballs. Others simply disappeared. No flares, no wreckage, no final words for families waiting at home. Telegrams would come weeks later, carrying the same sentence repeated over and over: missing. Presumed lost. He promised he'd be home for Christmas. The sea must have taken him. They said the ship never arrived. Those who sailed the convoys called it the long silence, a superstition that when the ocean grew too quiet, death was near. And sometimes, sailors spoke of ghostly lights on the horizon, dim shapes of ships that should not be there. Convoys moving in perfect formation, but with no signal, no sound. They said those were the lost ones. The convoys that never made it home. The ocean still hides them, ships buried beneath miles of cold black water. Their crews frozen in time, their last cries trapped in steel hulls. This is their story. The story of ghost ships and sinking horrors, and of the men who vanished into the Atlantic night, never to return. In the first years of the war, Britain stood alone, surrounded by sea, starving for supplies. Everything that kept the island alive: food, oil, weapons, even paper and fuel had to come by ship. And those ships had to cross an ocean ruled by death. The Atlantic was more than water. It was a weapon, a vast, cold battlefield stretching from the coast of America to the harbors of England. And upon it, the Allies built their fragile lifeline, the convoy system. From Halifax, New York, and later from Iceland, hundreds of merchant vessels would gather: old steamers, tankers, cargo ships, crewed by men barely trained for war. They formed into groups, sailing in columns and rows, escorted by a handful of Royal Navy destroyers and corvettes. This was the convoy, a floating city of hope and fear. Every convoy had a code name: HX, SC, ON, PQ. To sailors, they were not letters, they were lifelines. A convoy's name became its identity, its heartbeat across the waves. But as soon as they left the safety of harbor, they entered a realm of shadows. The Atlantic was watched by the Kriegsmarine's U-boats, wolfpacks waiting beneath the surface. Their commander, Admiral Nitz, called them "my grey wolves." They hunted in silence, guided by radio reports and radar pings, waiting for night to fall before striking. When the first torpedo hit, panic spread faster than fire. A single strike could rip a ship apart, oil and steel turning the sea into a burning mirror. Men jumped overboard into freezing water that killed within minutes. Others were trapped below deck, their screams muffled by the sound of boiling oil. Still, the convoys kept moving. Even as ships burned behind them, even as comrades vanished in the dark, they pushed onward, because stopping meant death for all. Each crossing was a gamble, and every successful arrival meant survival for millions back home. The sailors knew it. They were not just carrying crates or barrels, they were carrying the war itself. The fate of Britain, and later the entire Allied cause, depended on men whose names history rarely remembers. A sailor once wrote in his diary, "We're ghosts before we're dead." The ocean has already claimed us, it's just waiting to collect. For some, the ocean's patience ran out quickly. For others, it waited until the Arctic winds came, where convoys sailed not just against submarines, but against nature itself. Next, we journey north, into the Arctic convoys, where the sea froze, the sky never slept, and the ships became floating coffins beneath the northern lights. The men who sailed north knew they were leaving the world behind. Beyond the tip of Norway, beyond the Arctic Circle, there was only ice, wind, and death. They called them the Arctic Convoys. Their mission: to deliver supplies to the Soviet Union, to keep the Eastern Front alive. From 1941 onward, Thousands of men crossed a sea that even nature seemed to reject. Temperatures dropped to 40 below zero. Metal froze to flesh. Gun barrels cracked from the cold. And if a man fell into the sea, he would be dead in less than a minute. But worse than the cold was the fear, because up there, in that silent white void, the sky was clear, and that meant the enemy could see everything. German reconnaissance planes circled overhead. Wolfpacks of U-boats prowled below. And on the frozen horizon, the shadow of the battleship Tirpitz haunted every sailor's mind, a monster of steel they could not see, but could never forget. In the summer of 1942, the convoy PQ-17 set sail from Iceland. 35 merchant ships, escorted by powerful warships. They carried tanks, trucks, planes, ammunition, everything the Soviets needed to survive. For days, they moved through fog and drifting ice, watched by the silent eye of German aircraft. Then, on July 4th, the order came, a signal that would turn the Arctic into a graveyard. Convoy PQ-17 scatter. The Admiralty feared that the Tirpitz was moving into attack, and in that moment, panic replaced discipline. The escorts turned away. The convoy broke apart, ships scattered across hundreds of miles of ocean, alone, unprotected, hunted, one by one. They were found. Torpedoes tore through hulls like paper. Flames lit up the polar night. Some ships sank in minutes, their crews trapped below deck. Others drifted for days, frozen corpses clinging to lifeboats. Their faces turned to the snow. WWII the time it was over. Only 11 ships out of 35 reached Russia. Hundreds of men never came home. One survivor wrote later, "When the convoy scattered, I saw death everywhere. Ships burning on the ice, men frozen solid, still holding their ropes. The sea didn't heal us. The cold did." The Arctic convoys became legend, symbols of endurance, courage, and sacrifice. But to those who lived them, they were nightmares that never thawed. Even now, in the depths of the Bering Sea, the wrecks of PQ-17 rest like tombstone steel coffins beneath the eternal ice. Their secrets locked in frozen silence. The ocean had claimed them. But the ghosts of the Arctic were not alone, because far to the south, in warmer waters, another kind of disappearance haunted the convoy, ships that did not freeze, but simply vanished. Every sailor knows the ocean speaks in whispers. The creak of the hull, the groan of the mast, the strange sounds that echo across the fog. But during the war, there were nights when the sea whispered something else. Names of ships long lost and voices that should not have been heard again. They called them the ghost convoys. Stories told in bars, whispered on decks, of ships found drifting with engines dead, crews missing, decks empty, but everything else untouched. As if the men had simply walked off the world. These weren't myths from sailors' imaginations. They were reports, logged by naval patrols, recorded in official documents that remain unsolved to this day. Case 1. The SSS HMO, an Arctic supply ship abandoned in 1931. She continued to drift for decades. Sighted again and again. Always empty, still afloat in impossible conditions. By the time the war came, sailors, they saw her ghostly outline on frozen horizons, a phantom of rust and ice. Case 2. The SSS Barang Medan. 1947. The war was over, but the seas still kept their horrors. An American rescue ship answered a distress call from the Medan. When they boarded, every crew member was dead, faces frozen in terror, mouths open in silent screams. No wounds, no gunfire. And moments later, the ship exploded and sank. No evidence, no survivors. Only a single phrase from the mast signal remained. All officers dead. The captain is dead. I die. Case 3. Convoy HX-229. March 1943. One of the largest convoy battles of the Atlantic. U-boats attacked relentlessly for days, but among the wreckage later recovered, a lone freighter was found drifting, its radio on, engines off, and not a single soul aboard. Food still on the tables. Logbook entries ending abruptly mid-sentence. Visibility low. Smoke to the east. Then nothing. What happened to those men? Did they abandon ship? Were they taken by fire or by fear? Some said they jumped into lifeboats that were never found. Others whispered of something else, a curse that followed convoys through the fog. Old sailors spoke of the pale lights, a strange glow that hovered above the sea after a sinking. A phosphorescent shimmer that never faded. They said those were the souls of drowned men, guiding the next convoy toward its doom. Sound, faint humming, like wind whistling through metal, and settling, but quiet. It was superstition, perhaps. But when enough ships vanish, when enough names disappear from the lists, superstition becomes survival. One naval chaplain wrote in his diary, The sea is full of voices. They call to us at night. Sometimes I think they only want to be remembered, and that perhaps is what the ghost ships truly are. Not monsters, not mysteries, but memories. Reminders that even the strongest steel can vanish, and that the sea forgets nothing. Yet even as legends spread, the war beneath the waves raged on. Because while some ships drifted lifeless, others hunted and were hunted in return. Next, we descend below the surface, into the dark realm of the U-boats, where silence was a weapon, and death came without warning. Down here, there is no day or night, only pressure, only silence for the men inside the steel belly of a U-boat. War was fought not on open water, but in darkness. 45 men, packed into a tube barely 100 feet long, breathing recycled air, sleeping beside torpedoes that could end their lives in a heartbeat. They were called the Hunters of the Deep, the Grey Wolves of Admiral Nimitz fleet. Their mission was simple: destroy the convoys, strangle Britain's supply lines, and win the war through starvation. But the ocean has no favorites, and in time, the hunters became the hunted. That sound a single cold note echoing through the hull was every submariner's nightmare. Sonar, the sound of the enemy finding you. When the Allies perfected sonar detection and depth charges, the U-boat were turned from predator to panic. Submarines that once stalked silently were now cornered in steel traps, crushed by explosions from above, sound, escalating sonar pings, then thunderous underwater blasts, the hull groaning violently. Inside, chaos. The lights flickered, pipes burst, men whispered prayers they hadn't said in years. Tiefenangriff, depth charge attack, orders shouted, hands bleeding from twisted valves, oxygen fading, and above them, destroyers circled like sharks. British and Canadian corvettes sweeping the sea with sonar, dropping explosives by the dozens. One survivor of U-552 later wrote, "Every explosion was a hammer from hell. We could hear the ocean itself tearing at our ship. When it was over, I could taste metal in the air and blood in my mouth." Not all submarines died fighting. Some simply vanished, lost without trace, entire crews swallowed by the deep. Wartime records list them as missing, presumed sunk. But the truth lies thousands of feet below. Years later, when wreck divers began to find them, many U-boats were discovered perfectly preserved, their hatches sealed, their men still inside, frozen in eternal silence. Inside those wrecks, time stopped in 1944, half-written letters still in lockers, boots neatly stacked, clocks stopped at the hour of death. It is said that if you swim too close, you can still hear the metallic echo of their final words trapped in air pockets that have not moved in 80 years. And above those watery tombs, the convoys kept sailing. The hunters were gone, but the fear remained, because in the fog and endless waves, ships were still vanishing, entire groups swallowed by storms or silence, leaving behind no trace, no wreck, no grave, nothing. Next, we follow the trail of the disappearing convoys, the ones that left port and were never seen again. War can be explained: torpedoes, gunfire, explosions. But sometimes the sea does not need a reason. Sometimes it simply takes. Throughout the war, dozens of ships vanished, not from battle, not from bombs, but from the sea itself. Convoys that left port in calm weather, only to dissolve into silence. No SOS, no wreckage, just gone. One of the most mysterious losses came in 1940. The merchant ship Cymbeline, sailing alone off the coast of Ireland. She reported engine trouble. Then nothing. Weeks later, a lifeboat washed ashore. Inside were provisions untouched, and a logbook that ended mid-sentence. Wind increasing, sky black to the west. There were no survivors, no bodies, just the sea, soft thunderclap, then fading wind. In the North Atlantic, the convoy SC-7 faced a storm so brutal that even U-boats dared not approach. Waves higher than houses, gale force winds tearing metal apart. When the storm cleared, rescue crews found oil slicks, drifting crates, and a single life jacket. Nothing more. The ocean does not always kill with fury. Sometimes it kills with silence. In 1943, the freighter Empire Tower was spotted sailing alone, completely intact, but her radio was dead. A passing aircraft circled twice, and through binoculars, the pilot saw tables set in the mess hall, doors swinging open, and not a single human being aboard. When a naval trawler finally reached the ship 2 days later, she was gone. Sailors began to speak of the grey passages, stretches of sea where compasses spun wild, and radar screens flickered like dying stars. Ships that entered them never came out. Some called it madness, others a curse. One old seaman told his grandson years later, The sea is alive, boy. It knows when you're afraid. It can smell fear. And sometimes it decides it's had enough of men. The war's official records list these vanishings as weather losses. But sailors knew better. Because when the fog closed in, they could see shapes moving alongside them, silent silhouettes in the mist, convoys sailing in perfect line, ships that gave no light and left no wake. The last ones, they said. The convoys that had already gone below .to this day. The Atlantic holds their bones in trenches deeper than mountains are tall, in darkness no light has ever touched. Steel and souls fused together, drifting through eternity, and yet, in every sailor's story, there's always the same ending: a glance back into the fog, and the whisper that follows. We are not alone out here. Next, we rise from the depths to hear the words of those who lived, the survivors who saw the sea take everything, and somehow came back. The sea took millions, but not all. Some men came back, scarred, silent, and older than their years. They were the lucky ones. Or so people said. But for those who survived the convoys, the nightmare never ended. When they returned home, they spoke little of what they'd seen. Wives would ask, "Was it bad out there?" And the men would nod once, their eyes distant, as if still watching the horizon. They carried memories no medal could honor. Men burning in oil-slicked water. Friends vanishing into the black. Their names forever written only in the ship's log from one survivor's diary, dated 1943. We saw the torpedo before it hit. It was like watching death swim toward you. I remember the heat, then the cold. The sea took my shipmates one by one, and when it was done, it left only silence. Another sailor, aged 19 at the time, recalled, "I woke up in the water." The ship was gone. The night sky was full of sparks, burning oil floating around us. We tied ourselves together so we wouldn't drift apart. By morning, I was alone. Those who survived the Arctic convoys often said the cold never left them. Their fingers, their bones always aching, even in summer. But the real frost was in their dreams. Some heard the screams again when it rained. Others smelled diesel and salt and couldn't breathe. In the silence of the night, they would wake to phantom sounds: the creak of a ship, the splash of a man falling overboard. They did not speak of ghosts. They didn't need to. They were the ghosts, living reminders of those still below. A letter written by a convoy gunner to his mother read, "You once told me the sea was beautiful. It isn't. It's hungry, and I think it keeps a piece of every man it swallows." By war's end, over 36,000 merchant sailors had died at sea. Many have no grave but the waves. Their families never saw them again, only their names carved in stone, and a sea breeze where their voices used to be. And yet, through it all, there was courage. Ordinary men who sailed into terror, knowing that survival was a coin toss, and still, they went. One captain wrote in his final log before sailing, "If we do not go, others will die. If we go, perhaps we die instead." So we go. The survivors carried that sentence with them for the rest of their lives. Next, the ocean falls silent once more. We reach the end where the sea becomes a memory, and the ghosts of the convoys whisper one last time. The war ended, but the sea never gave them back. In the vast Atlantic, in the frozen Arctic, in black waters where light has never reached, the wrecks still lie. Silent, whole worlds entombed beneath the waves. Sound, faint sonar ping, a ghostly echo in the deep. Their hulls are rusted now, their decks buried under sand and time. Yet, inside, you can almost feel them, cups still resting on tables, boots by the bunks, a logbook left open to a final unfinished line. They are not gone. They are only deeper. Every ship, every name. A story swallowed but not forgotten. Convoy PQ-17, HX2-9, SC118 numbers in archives. But to those who remember, they are sacred. In 2002, divers found a ship that had been missing for 60 years. Inside, they discovered a brass plate still shining. It read, "To the men who never returned, may the ocean be gentle. There's a saying among sailors that the sea has no memory. But they're wrong. The ocean remembers everything. Every cry, every heartbeat that stopped beneath its surface, every light that went out in the dark when storms passed through those old convoy routes. Some say you can still hear them. Voices on the wind, a bell ringing once in the fog, the ocean mourning in its own eternal language. And maybe that's what ghosts truly are. Not spirits haunting the living, but memories that refuse to be erased. Men who fought, froze, and drowned so that others could live. So if you ever stand on a cliff above the sea and feel the wind whisper like an old song, listen carefully. You might hear them. The ghost ships, the convoys, the forgotten men of the deep, because history forgets. But the ocean never does.